today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about why knowing your superpower is vital to your marriage. Anything the president doesn't do well, he delegates to other people. I want you to start thinking about your life as if you are the president of the United States, as if you either have the unlimited support or will have the unlimited support for yourself, for your partnership, for your family. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. I'm your host. I'm Rich Heller. And today we're talking about your secret, maybe not so secret for some of you, superpower and why it's being wasted. But it isn't just about why it's being wasted. It's about how it can be harnessed for you, for your marriage, for your family, for your work, everything in your life. Partnerships collapse when people operate outside of their strengths. Partnerships of any kind collapse when people operate outside of their strengths. Have you noticed that the President of the United States is always allowed to operate within his strengths? Anything the president doesn't do well, he delegates to other people because the government of the United States has enough money and people to cover everything he's not good at. And what the president or she someday is good at, they do. Now, you may not be fond of the strengths of some presidents, but they lean into them. Well, I want you to start thinking about your life as if you are the president of the United States, as if you either have the unlimited support or will have the unlimited support for yourself, for your partnership, for your family, for your work, whatever your work situation is. Some of you are working together, and this is depleting you because you're so far from your strengths, it isn't even funny. You see, the way many of us live our lives is as if we were the president of a country that had no government whatsoever, no support whatsoever, nothing. We want to become the presidents of our lives, is basically what I'm telling you. A listener writes, I used to feel confident and creative, like I brought something valuable to my relationship. Now I just feel like I'm treading water, constantly doing things I'm not good at. I miss feeling energized and respected. Guess, is that a man or a woman? The key word is respected, all right? For men, being respected is really important. That's Tom. And Tom, I'm going to imagine that you feel like that at work sometimes too, but very often when we're feeling like that in our marriage, we're not feeling like that at work. Very often when we're feeling like that in our marriage, we're seeking out being energized and respected elsewhere. In fact, I would argue the root cause of some infidelity is not feeling energized and respected. And then we meet someone who suddenly lights us up, who suddenly shows us that respect, who gives us the space to be in our strengths. And remember when you fell in love, how your partner made you feel that way. When you were both in love, you saw each other's superpowers, right? You saw each other as evolved, whole, complete, perfect beings, and you fell in love with that. Now, the challenge of marriage is that we fall in love with that and we engage in a contract, but we don't often know what the contract is. I'm going to tell you the contract. The contract is, I'm here to support you in being that person, that shared vision we have of who you can be. And you're here to support me in being that shared vision of who I can be. And what happens is we get so jammed up with keeping all the plates spinning, getting the kids to school and paying the bills and taking care of business that we lose sight of the contract, and we start to lose sight of our superpowers. We start to feel lost, like we've lost being in love. I can't tell you how many people come to me and say, I love them, but I'm not in love with them. And I say to them, you don't need to be in love with them because love is a muscle, and we're supposed to exercise that muscle when the going gets tough. When the tough get going, right? But what that means is not that we're going to suffer endlessly. It means that we're going to exercise our love muscle and speak faith and confidence into our partner anyway. It means that we're going to see that we're feeling depleted, see that we feel like we're doing things that we're not necessarily really good at. We're miscast in roles that drain us, that don't energize us. Exercising your love muscle means leaning into your hope. And the hope is that you're not only going to rediscover your strengths, but you're going to blossom in them. That you're not only going to rediscover confidence, but you're going to grow in confidence and faith. A faith in a better future, a faith in a future where you and your partner are becoming your best selves and your children are growing into their best selves moment by moment, day by day, where you feel seen, where you feel valued and valuable, not only in your relationship, but in every aspect of your life. And if you're working together, as many people who come to Rich in Relationship are these days, it's even more challenging because in the work scenario, we definitely don't have the funding of the United States government. When we're running a business, we're running often, especially in the beginning, on tight budgets. We're doing lots of jobs. Some of them we're not so good at. My personal experience with this is I wore many hats. I wear many hats. I actually wear many hats here at Rich in Relationship. Guess what one of my fun, most creative, playful hats is? It's this podcast. But some of the other hats, like crunching the numbers and tracking the numbers and making sure that everybody gets exactly what they expected and more. The details are not my strength. My strength is big picture. My strength is concepts. This is where I thrive. And even though I do the other things well, I actually get help with them now. So they get done better. But when I used to do them on my own, it was kind of like claws on a chalkboard. A lot of you don't grow up with chalkboards, so you don't know what that sounds like. A lot of you grew up with screens, whiteboards in high school and elementary school. What's another noise? It's like sneakers on a smooth surface going squeak, 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 something really irritating. Well, our friends Brad and Gwen know this problem well. You remember Brad and Gwen? They've been evolving through this podcast series on prosperous partnerships. Prosperous partnerships engage our best selves and help us to evolve and grow into our best selves. Brad and Gwen have been on that journey with us. They have stabilized their roles. Remember that Brad and Gwen in this series, they work together, have a shared business. They have a shared life. They've stabilized their roles at work and at home. They're no longer in a space of avoiding conflict, nor are they engaging in destructive conflict, the fight, as often. It is happening, but they know what it is now, and they back off of it. And yet, guess what? They hit a new wall. It was quiet and potent. Brad felt exhausted and disengaged. Gwen felt invisible and frustrated. The business was running. Kids were doing okay in school. But Brad and Gwen themselves, felt like we're not growing. Like we're just getting things done. Gwen said, I'm competent at what I'm doing, but I don't feel alive anymore. Brad said, I don't know if what I'm doing matters anymore. Working together, what became immediately clear is they were operating outside of their zones of genius. They had lost sight of their superpower. In fact, they didn't know what their superpower was. And we took them through a beta program that we're doing actually right now. Now through April, we're running a beta program for couples, particularly couples who are working together, but it'll work for you if you're not. We've got couples who are not working together who are going through this beta, where we help Brad and Gwen to find out what are their strengths. What is their superpower? And we help them to figure out how can they harness their strengths and their superpower in their business and at home. And we made a plan. Brad and Gwen made a plan with us for how they were going to get the things done that they weren't so good at. There were things that fell between the cracks between them. A partnership, in a strong, prosperous partnership, both partners come to the partnership with strengths. But guess what? They don't cover everything. They cover a lot, though. And the things that fell between the cracks, if they couldn't find someone in their workspace or at home to fill it for them, they made a plan for as financial prosperity grew, they could hire people to delegate it to. So what they knew was they weren't going to hear that squeaky noise. They weren't going to be doing that thing that they could do pretty well, but didn't love doing for too long. Because honestly, when you do something that that it doesn't ring your bell when you're doing it too long, and there's no end in sight, what happens is you start to lose heart. And that's what had been happening to Brad and Gwen. But now they had a plan. It's kind of as if you were going to clean toilets and you didn't really love it, but it was a way to make money for the rest of your life. You'd get a little depressed. You'd get a little sad. But if you knew that cleaning toilets for the next 2 years or a year was a stepping stone to doing something you really love and you feel passionately about, then it wouldn't be so bad. You see what I'm saying here? Gwen started to feel like she was coming back to life. And Brad started to feel like he was making a difference, which was so important to him. They realized that they weren't failing, right? That the failure was a lesson. And the lesson was they needed to rediscover, realign their strengths and their superpower. And that is what we helped them to do. We led them through this strengths reclamation process as individuals and as partners. We helped them identify their natural areas of excitation, energization. I'm reaching for words here, really. Like the things that made them feel alive, energized, and potent. Were the things that made them feel like not only were they contributing, but they were also building themselves up in the process. You see, a win-win is super important. And when we lean into our strengths, into our superpower, right, that's when we feel energized. That's when we feel alive. That's when we start having fun. We map those strengths, how to stop underusing them and distorting them, and how to start really leaning into them. And they had a plan for when there was a crisis, so that when there was a crisis, they didn't revert back to their old ways. We realigned their responsibilities at home and at work with their zones of genius, their strengths, the things that juiced them. Here in my life, I used to feel like I felt like my wife managed everything and I needed to put my 2 cents into everything. I felt like I needed to be in control of everything. And it's interesting because I've surrendered to her strengths and she has surrendered to mine. And her strengths, a lot of her strengths are around family. So our kids think that she's in control and they don't see my strengths. They only see the results of my strengths. The results of my strengths are that everything is functioning, that things are safe, that they're provided for. My strengths are foundational. One of her strengths has to do with how we all interact. And we have dogs. And we typically had 2 dogs, and we'd been missing one for a while. It was time to get a new dog. And I was dead set because at that time, I felt like I wasn't the man I needed to be. I wanted a dog who was more aggressive. Like I wanted to show the world when I walked the dog that my dog was a stud. But she had her eye on something different, a dog that was going to be a better fit for our family. And at that time, I was just learning to lean into my strengths and allow her to lean into hers. And so I allowed my projection of what I needed in a dog to take the back seat. And today we have an animal who's not the animal I would have picked temperament-wise, but who is a perfect fit. Actually, for me too and our family, the lessons he's teaching me are so much more important than having a dog who's super aggressive. Not that he can't be aggressive. He's learning to be, but that's just not his temperament normally. That was an example of me, because I felt insecure, trying to take over an area that I'm not as strong at, and she was as strong at. And Brad and Gwen had a lot of this going on too. And I'm going to guess as I'm sharing this that some of you are going, wow, maybe that's what's happening here. Maybe the reason why my partner has their stuff in my stuff is they're feeling a little insecure. Maybe the reason why they feel like they need to micro-control my life is they're feeling a little insecure. And I'm sharing this with you so that you can see that it's not that they think less of you, it's that they feel less in themselves. When we feel less in ourselves, That's when we tend to cross into doing things that maybe we're not especially good at and start taking over things that other people are. Back to Brad and Gwen, though. Their relationship didn't just suffer from dysfunction, all right? It was dysfunctional, but what made it dysfunctional was displacement. They had displaced one another from the things they were best at. When couples operate outside their strengths for too long, they burn out, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. They begin to resent the partner that once gave them purpose. And that's right where Brad and Gwen were, but no more. The problem is not capacity. Brad and Gwen had the capacity to get things done. The problem was misalignment. Someone is overfunctioning in a role they're not built for. They're doing stuff that they're just not wired for, and they're overfunctioning in it, while their actual strengths are on the back burner, unused, unrecognized, and maybe even resented by the other person, because when we try and lean into our strengths in an area that we've given over to someone else or that they've taken, they can be resentful if we step in and try and take it back. It starts to show up as criticism, by the way. I like everything in my house to be orderly, and my wife was a little more of a leave it in places kind of person. And when I get annoyed sometimes when she doesn't have the house the way I want it, and I start pecking at her. And on the other side, I have ideas about relationships that don't always align with my wife's. And when I lean into those ideas, which in the case of the dog, for example, are not always effective, she can peck on me, right? What happens is we start pecking on each other when we see that someone is doing something that goes against our strength. This thing of embracing our strengths, recognizing the strengths of our partner, and allowing each person to have their strengths, and allowing people to have the things they're not strong in, to just get that they're never going to do what we do well. That's why they picked us. They picked us because we do things well that they don't, and we picked them because they do things that we don't. Just allow that. That is huge. That is the basis for a prosperous partnership. In a prosperous partnership, your strengths are designed in. In a prosperous partnership, we give our partner latitude for not being strong in the areas that we're strong in, right? Because that was why we got into a partnership with them. There's emotional gifting, emotional resilience. There is grace. We give the other person grace for what? Not being like me. They give us grace for not being like them. We give them grace for not being fully evolved. They give us grace for not being fully evolved. Strengths are designed in, and difference is not tolerated, it is leveraged. Brad and Gwen implemented a new design focus. Every week, they sat down and audited what were they each doing, how were they feeling energetically, how fulfilled and happy were they, and they made sure that tasks were delegated into strengths to the best of their ability, and that they continue to identify areas where neither of them had true strengths where they could bring in others. They had temporary delegation and they experimented. If they weren't most excited about a task, who was least irritated by a task? And going back to my own example, I am least irritated by the task of emptying the dishwasher and putting things in order. It's not my favorite thing to do, but it irritates me the least. It annoys the crap out of my wife. So I don't expect her to do it. And there are things that she does that I am least irritated by. That she is least irritated by. There are things that she does that she is least irritated by of the two of us. I'm not crazy about doing laundry. She doesn't mind it. I don't love making the bed. She doesn't mind it as much as I do. That doesn't mean I never make the bed. It just means there are things that that's less grating for her than it is for me, that she does. And there are things that are less grating for me than are for her that I do. There is clear responsibility and delegation so that we're maximally leaning into our strengths and minimally leaning into our irritations. Naming competence differences, naming what resonates and what doesn't, and even what grates and how much it grates on a scale of 1 to 10 was huge for Brad and Gwen. As these shifts took root, something powerful happened. Gwen started to feel heard emotionally, Brad started to feel understood and respected because their partnership became less about covering the bases, checking the boxes, and more about unlocking potential in the process, right? So I want you to get that when we're leading a box-checking life, we start to ignore growth and potential. If you want to have a prosperous partnership, the focus needs to be on growth and potential while you check the boxes. It doesn't mean the boxes don't get checked. When strengths go unused, relationships feel like obligation. Work feels like an obligation. Imagine how your kids feel when you're getting them ready for school and taking them to school, and you're just like, I got to get this done. And you're not in the process of loving them, of building them up, of preparing them for that launch. And I want you to know, I've been there. I'm like, as I say this, I'm imagining all the times. I was like, okay, let's go. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Now, the great thing about that attitude is it doesn't leave room for a lot of resistance or a lot of baloney. But the bad news is they don't feel as cared for and as uplifted as they could. And that's part of what happens is when we bring our secret superpower into what we're doing, when we bring our passion, our love, our enthusiasm, our sense of personal growth into what we do, we inject it into everyone around us. Have you ever been around someone who's like that? You just want to be in their presence because they're so bubbly and so energized and fun and playful. That's where we're looking to go in our marriages and in our work. And if you're working together and you're at home together, this becomes doubly important. Because what happens is when we're just checking boxes and we have that attitude in both places, things can get really stale and really depressing. The advantage that people have who aren't working together is they can at least maybe create a little juice in their workspace because they're not carrying that dynamic with them from home to work. But if you're working together in both spaces and you're engaged in your superpowers, it's doubly uplifting, you see? So the negatives can be more negative, the positives can be more positive. I want you to get that if you're listening to this and going, oh, wow, I'm going through that right now. We both work in a deli and we barely talk to each other. We both work in insurance and we barely talk to each other. Whatever you have going on, just get that your superpower, your passion isn't gone. It's buried under misalignment. Reclaim it and reclaim your partnership. Reclaim your lives together and as individuals. And when you do that, things are going to get more fun. And you know what drives a lot of fun is playfulness. And that's going to be the topic of the next episode. Where did the play go? Hey, if you like what you're hearing here, subscribe, share this with other people. In the next episode, Where Did the Play Go? We'll explore why modern partnerships lose their sense of play and how restoring it is essential for a sense of safety, trust, and intimacy and creativity. Let's be honest, we can't really play unless we're feeling secure and safe. And we're going to talk about that more in the next episode. In the meantime, have a fantastic day and an amazing tomorrow. And thank you for being a listener and a participant in Rich in Relationship.